This is the toughest part of my job, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever we have a serious banger of a One Piece chapter and so much stuff happened that I have a hard time deciding what I should tackle first. Chapter 1059. I don't know what it is with chapters that are in the 50s for whatever reason. Like, back in, like, chapter 956, 957, a lot of really crazy stuff happened then. You know, now it's chapter 1059. I don't know, but okay. Well, I really want to make a video about Wang Xi, like we are. Oh, by the way, if you found that annoying before, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry. If you were sitting there, because I get comments every once in a while, they're like, okay, Tekking, the Wang Xi thing is getting really annoying. Can you please stop? I'm like, oh no, it's going to be all Wang all the time, moving on forward, okay? But, oh man, I really want to do a video about Wang Xi. But he also didn't really have a huge role to play in the last chapter. He didn't even show up. Blackbeard just kind of mentioned him off, like candidly to Kobe or whatever. You know, just like offhandedly mentioned Wang Xi or Ochoku. So I'm like, okay, I'll hold off on that video until later this week. Okay. We should probably talk about the Seraphim. That is probably the biggest takeaway from the last chapter. In fact, it was even stated, like, by Sandersonia, I believe. Like, at the end of the chapter, when the Kuja are recuperating and, you know, the Amazon Lily is being rebuilt and everything. Remember, Blackbeard and the Marines really messed up that island, okay? The new Pacifista, the Seraphims, you know, they sliced apart the mountain. Blackbeard used his black hole to, like, crush the entire town, just like he did back at Bonaro Island. So there's a big recovery project going on right now. But even despite all of that, you know, despite all of the damage that they suffered and that Boa almost died, and then, you know, Blackbeard was there trying to steal her ability, and then Rayleigh showed up despite all of that, the thing that Boa, Sandersonia, and Marigold were the most focused on was the fact that one of the Seraphim looked exactly like Boa Hancock when she was a little kid. And, except she had brown skin, white hair, black wings, on fire, like a Lunarian, and that also she can apparently fire lasers out of her hands like one of the first model Pacifistas, okay? And also star-shaped pupils. I'm sure all of this is going to come to play later, in some ways more than one. I'm not really sure why their pupils are shaped like stars, so I don't know. The Goro say, you know, because the 5 elder stars, 5 pointed stars for their eyes, I don't know if that's going to be even relevant. Just maybe Oda just drew them that way because it looked cool or whatever, okay? So, yeah, let's dive into the Seraphim, and then we'll talk about other things this week. There's a lot to unpack here. Okay, so we already knew that there was going to be a new model of Pacifista coming out, okay? It hasn't been referenced since, like, forever, okay? Since, like, Return to Sabaody, when Sentomaru mentioned that the Pacifistas that fought against Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji after they got back from the time skip, they're the same models from 2 years ago, so obviously they haven't gotten any stronger, and they were more of the prototypes anyway, okay? Vegapunk was rolling out this Pacifista project. That was a relatively new thing that he was doing in the past few years. Vegapunk has been on the government payroll for a long time. We don't exactly know how long, but I like to think it's around 30 years or so that Vegapunk has been working directly for the world government. Now, Vegapunk is a lot older than that. He was mentioned by the G5 Marines to be like an old man, like that's old man Vegapunk or whatever. So I like to think he's probably like 80 or 90. He might even be well over 100 years old. He might have augmented his own body with like cybernetic enhancements, so he might be like hundreds of years old or something, kept alive by the power of science. But not just any ordinary science, mad science. Like, seriously, like, I've been thinking Vegapunk was a good guy, you know, working alongside the Revolutionary Army, like, in secret, because there's obviously a connection there between Kuma and the Revolutionary Army, and then Kuma got changed into PX-0 by Vegapunk, but Vegapunk also programmed a few things into Kuma, where if you think that Vegapunk was 100% loyal to the world government, he would not have gone ahead with, you know, Kuma's wishes to, like, program me to protect the Straw Hats ship for 2 years. That just seems weird that he would do that. You know what I mean? So I like to think Vegapunk is a good guy, but holy shit, does this guy know some mad science, okay? This guy is like, all right, so the government orders him to make a bunch of Death Terminator robots, and he's like, yeah, Okay, I could do that. So he makes a bunch of them modeled after the warlord Kuma, which is a smart move because Kuma is known as the tyrant. He's a very physically imposing guy. So if you're going to make these death terminators, might as well make them based off of somebody that's intimidating. That's why Arnold was the Terminator model for the T-101. You know what I mean? You pick somebody intimidating. You don't turn me into a Terminator. I'm not intimidating at all. You know what I mean? So anyway, yeah, you have Kuma walking around. In the first model Pacifistas, they were pretty durable. It took all of the Straw Hat crew pre-time skip to take one of them down. It took like Luffy and Sanji and Zoro all putting their strength into one big attack to finally take down just the PX-4, okay? And so then they also can fire lasers out of their palms and also out of their mouths, okay? And they're also pretty intelligent. They have a pretty decent AI. I don't know what model of Windows they're running on, but it was at least Windows XP. By the way, Windows XP was like the best. Who remembers Windows XP? Vista sucked. I liked 7, but XP, oh man, yeah. So the Pacifistas Model 1 ran on Windows XP, all right? So after the time skip, you assume that, like, okay, Vegapunk has been working in his lab for 2 years now to improve this Pacifista technology. I guess I always assumed they would still look like Kuma. Like, maybe they would just still have the same exact model, maybe with, like, a different outfit. Maybe they would have jet boosters on the back. Maybe they could fly around. Maybe they could fire different kinds of lasers or something. Maybe a Gatling gun. I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting for Pacifista version 2.0, but I certainly wasn't expecting this, all right? So, Vegapunk has now apparently... you know what I think happened? I think what happened was the government approached him and was like, okay, listen, Vegapunk, I think the warlord days are numbered. Like, we're going to be abolishing the warlord system pretty soon. So we need you to make new Pacifistas that are just as powerful, if not stronger, than the entirety of the Royal Warlord Initiative, okay? And so Vegapunk was just like, all right, you want me to make you basically new warlords that are better than the previous warlords but are more obedient. And the government is like, yeah, do whatever you gotta do. And Vegapunk's like, all right, you guys ordered it. All right, so what better way to replace the warlords than with, like, robot warlords or cloned warlords that are also Lunarians or whatever, right? It makes the most sense. It's like, okay, you're getting rid of Boa Hancock and Mihawk, and Doflamingo's not a warlord anymore, but you need somebody that's as strong as them. Let's just use their DNA and make copies of them that are completely subservient to the Tenryubito and the world government. You know, mad science, man. That's what you do. This is why I'm also kind of glad I'm always using Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty to portray Vegapunk, because we just don't know what he looks like yet, so that works for me, right? Anyway, okay. So he took the warlord DNA, which should probably not have been hard to obtain, just because of the fact the warlords were working for the world government. I wouldn't even be surprised if, like, as part of the entrance to become a warlord, you have to give, like, a blood sample or something. I don't know. Like, it wouldn't be hard for them to get some DNA from the warlords, some hair or some blood or something. Also remember that Boa was, you know, imprisoned at Marijois by the Tenryubito, you know, for a long time. Okay, so getting the DNA from the warlords wouldn't be very difficult. Kuma sort of volunteered himself to be modified. There were 2 Seraphim that attacked Amazon Lily. It was mentioned that there were only 2 that were there. So you had the Seraphim modeled after Boa, and then you had the Seraphim modeled after Mihawk. Okay, they look very similar to these characters. Oda went ahead and drew all of the warlords when they were children, and it's pretty much a 1-to-1. You know what I mean? Okay, so that also brings up the question of, like, a lot of people, like, the next step is obviously, is there a Seraphim model of Doflamingo? Is there a Seraphim model of Crocodile? Is there a Seraphim model of Buggy and of Blackbeard? Because Blackbeard was like a warlord for like a week. It was a little longer than that, but you know what I mean? He wasn't a warlord for very long. So if there's any of the Seraphim that are not modeled after a warlord, I would say it would be, you know, Blackbeard or maybe Buggy. You know, I'm not really sure. I mean, Law was a warlord too. So are we going to have a Seraphim Law showing up? That would actually, oh my God. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if Law went up against the Seraphim modeled after his younger self? He'd be having so much PTSD, I don't think he'd be able to even fight that thing. I mean, he would be able to fight eventually, but if he sees, like, the ghost of his past, like his 13-year-old self show up and be like, why did you let them all die, Law? Why did you let your family die at Flevance, Law? Why would you do this, Law? You know, and then he would just be like, ah! You know, he would be having a freak out moment, I think, from that. That's terrifying. But you know what? I think we're thinking too small potatoes with this. Why do they have to just be limited to the warlords? Vegapunk works for the world government. You could literally have Seraphim based off of like Garp, Akainu, Kizaru, Fujitora, Aramaki. They're on the government payroll. Sengoku, for God's sake. They could literally go over to Sengoku and be like, all right, for the new Vegapunk's, Seraphim protocol or whatever, we need some of your hair, Sengoku. And Sengoku's like, okay. I mean, he works for them. What's he going to do? Say no? I mean, I guess he could, but you know what I mean? Like, they can get that DNA very easily. So then you have, like, Akainu and Kizaru and Garp, like, in their prime. This is a military organization, okay? I'm assuming at some point there's probably going to be a Marine-wide blood test or something, right? Like, they have to do that. It's like a military organization. Like, all right, we're going to run some medical tests to make sure you're, ship shape for fighting the pirates and everything. They probably have samples of Sengoku and Kong. Kong, back in the day, was the original fleet admiral before Sengoku, and Garp and Akainu and all the admirals, all these really strong, Aokiji as well. Like, they probably have blood samples of all of them. And then they could just give them over to Vegapunk. It's like, all right, make a Seraphim of Aokiji, make a Seraphim of Kizaru, Seraphim of Akainu, Garp, Sengoku, Kong, the greatest Marines from history that are no longer with us. We might see a Seraphim version of Zephyr. Who knows? You know what I mean? Now, we also know these Seraphim are wicked strong. Now, in the review, I said that they were the combination of Lunarian DNA, which is pretty obvious, Warlord DNA, which is also very obvious. Like, Oda pretty much hit us over the head with a hammer on that one. Like, clearly one of them looks exactly like Boa, right down to the same damn earrings. So clearly Warlord DNA is involved here. The other one, kind of looked like Mihawk. By the way, the Seraphim that was Mihawk, I missed this in the review, but he also has a tattoo on his chest that said PX. So whenever he attacked Blackbeard was like, is that a PX? I was curious of, like, how did Blackbeard instantly know that this child, also a Lunarian, is a Pacifista? Doesn't look anything like the other Pacifistas. It was because he had a tattoo right there on his chest, like PX, and we didn't see the full title, so it might be PXS or something like that. They're PlayStations, basically, whatever. So Blackbeard saw that, and he's like, oh, you're a PX? These are the new Pacifistas? What's the government doing here, right? So they're very, very powerful right now, and I also like to think that's because there's cybernetic enhancements as well, because they're still PX, they're still Pacifistas, so, Vegapunk is like, okay, we got the base when it comes to the DNA or the lineage factor. In One Piece, it's called the lineage factor, and it was mentioned many, many times that Vegapunk was the one that cracked that, okay? In the context of the One Piece world, he's the one that figured out the human genome or the DNA of everything. Like, he can splice things however he wants, when he was part of Mads, all right? That also lends me to think it's been about 30 years ago since he started working for the government, because 30 years ago, I think, is when Queen and Judge all went their separate ways from Mads. Vegapunk ended up working for the government. Queen went to go work for Kaido. Judge, went with the Germa and everything. And all of their different technology is based off of that lineage factor research in some way. Judge is making clones. Queen makes viruses. And then Vegapunk does the Pacifistas. But you would think that everything that Queen and Judge were capable of doing with their technology, Vegapunk would be able to do just the same and also better, because he was like the master scientist that was like, instructing Queen and Judge. Like, he was like their teacher or whatever, right? It's also why I think Vegapunk is a pretty old dude, all right? So he took the Lunarian DNA he obtained from King, which this is fascinating because we're led to believe that King was the last Lunarian alive, and he most likely probably is, okay? But he was imprisoned at Punk Hazard for so long, and we've already seen this before in One Piece. Vegapunk is like making extinct creatures live again, all right? We saw that with the dragons. The dragons were most likely actual beings that lived a long time ago, and they were annihilated in something, I don't know, the Doom of Valyria or some shit. And then, Vegapunk is now making biologically cloned dragons on Punk Hazard. We saw the big red one, and we saw the tiny little green one, okay, that could fly, or fly at least a little bit, right? So, yeah, he's making, extinct creatures, live again, so that's like one aspect of his research, so the Lunarian DNA would fall into that. So they probably had examples of King's DNA for a very long time. So it was interesting that Oda showcased King off in the last arc, and we're sitting around thinking, like, I was thinking, like, oh, maybe some other Lunarians are alive. Maybe somewhere in the world there's, like, King's tribe tribe that is still around. And it's like, I don't think that's what Oda was going for. I don't think he introduced us to King and introduced us to Lunarians last arc so that we could think that the Lunarians are still around. Rather, we can understand just how terrifyingly powerful they are. They're referred to as the strongest race in the entire One Piece story in the whole world. And now the government has that power for themselves, okay? So just at the baseline, let's not forget everything King was capable of, all right? Zoro was busting out his absolute strongest moves against King, and some of them didn't even cut his skin enough to cause him to bleed, okay? Now, he does have a weakness in the way of, like, really strong Conqueror's Haki. You can sort of override those weaknesses. Conqueror's Haki, once it's strong enough, is sort of like almighty damage in the One Piece world, right? It's sort of like the kind of damage type that deals, it doesn't matter what resistances you have, it will deal damage, okay? So that's one way to circumvent it. Another thing that we learned from King is that when he has his flames turned on, he's very much impervious, or he has a huge defensive boost. When he turns his flames off, then he can move around really fast, but at a decrease of defense. Now, you can get into the whole question of like, all right, well, is there a set amount of time that he can keep his flames on, or does he have to periodically extinguish them when he's exerting himself? Like, what's the upper limit of this? We don't know everything yet, okay? But high durability, high speed, insanely powerful strength. That's just from the Lunarian DNA, all right? You combine that now with the Warlord DNA, and remember, this kind of goes back to Bite Hancock a little bit, because way back, remember in chapter 956, when, you know, the Warlords were stated to be abolished and all the Marines were arriving at their island, do you remember the last line of that chapter? You know, I think it was the last line of chapter 956 when, the Marines were attacking Amazon Lily, and everyone was like, oh no, Boa, the Empress, their Marines are attacking. And Boa is super chill, she's super stoic, she just kind of sits down in her throne, and she's like, do they not know why they made us warlords to begin with? It's because we're strong. Yeah, that's coming back to bite her at the end of the day, because it's like, yeah, you are strong, which is why the government made clone robots of all of you. There you go, all right. It's like, oh, shit, yeah, didn't expect that, did you? Okay, that's not good. So now, you have the Warlord DNA strong, that plus the Lunarian DNA. I also think Vegapunk probably threw in some cybernetic enhancements, a robot arm or something, you know, make it stronger, because, you know, Seraphim Mihawk was able to slice a whole damn mountain in half with just one swing of the sword, right? By the way, Blackbeard was still able to block that with his armament Haki, so, Blackbeard, once again, don't underestimate him. I don't know why some people still do, but no, he does make stupid choices sometimes, but he does have the strength to back it up, okay? He's not a pushover. He does feel pain a lot more than a lot of other people because of his Yami Yami no Mi, but that's just pain. That doesn't mean he has like a weak, endurance or defenses. He has really strong defenses. It's just he feels pain a lot more, right? So he was able to block that Seraphim strike from Clone Mihawk or whatever, the same attack that sliced a mountain in half. He was able to block that, all right? So that happened. I also like to think, yeah, the cybernetic enhancements have to be the thing, because they're firing lasers out of their hands and shit. They could probably fire it out of their... Maybe they could fire lasers out of their eyes. Maybe that's why they have star eyes. They can fire star-shaped lasers out of their eyes or something. I don't know. Or maybe Oda's just a fan of Steven Universe. I don't know. But there's a reason for everything, you know? So the other question I had was, okay, these warlords these Seraphim are based off of the warlords when they were kids, and they're already insanely powerful. So is this a situation where maybe, like, okay, Vegapunk was growing them in, like, the clone tank or something, and then the world government was like, okay, Vegapunk, it's time for the SSG to, show its worth and everything, where all that Tenryubito money was going to. And so Vegapunk might have been like, oh, they're not ready yet. They're not ready for combat yet. You know, they're still growing in the tanks or something. And the world government, they pulled the hierarchy card or whatever, the Gorosei. This is a direct order from the Gorosei. They need to be in action now. And so Vegapunk's like, all right, initiate Seraphim protocol, but if this all goes belly up, don't blame me. You know what I mean? So he maybe activates the Seraphim protocol earlier than expected, and then it's like, okay, they're still children, but they were able to, like, wreck an entire island, cut mountains in half, wipe out a bunch of pirates. They're like, the Seraphim that was Mihawk's clone was able to pretty much take out a good chunk of Blackbeard's crew that he brought with him. None of the heavy hitters like Vasco or Katarina, but still, and even contend with Blackbeard himself, okay? So yeah, but maybe given enough time, maybe a few months, they can grow and they can get even stronger. Like, they have an accelerated, like, healing, or not accelerated healing, but also like like accelerated aging or something like that, right? So, you know, they get to the point where they might just be perfect clones of Boa and Mihawk and Kuma and Doflamingo and Crocodile and maybe Buggy, you know? Don't make a clone Moria. There's no point in making a clone Moria, but like the clone ideas for all of the Marines, that makes sense, you know? There might be a clone of Kobe. This might be a weird thing by the end of One Piece. All of the characters are fighting against clones of themselves. My God, and you could go even further with it. You could say, like, what if the Marines obtain DNA from pirates? You know? Kaido was experimented on in Punk Hazard for a long time. I just realized this. Kaido with Lunarian DNA with cybernetic PX enhancements. Also possibly a dragon fruit because Vegapunk was able to make a replica of that, which he did deem as a failure, but that just kind of means what if Vegapunk never gave up the devil fruit research? Maybe the fruit that Momonosuke ate that was left on Punk Hazard, yeah, that one was a failure, but what if Vegapunk kept working with it and ended up perfecting the dragon fruit? This isn't good. Kaido might actually be dead, but now we have to deal with clone Terminator robot Lunarian Kaido, who's also a dragon. That's terrifying. The possibilities here are terrifying, especially if the Seraphim are robots. Like if Vegapunk installed, like, you know, it's like my CPU allows me to have a free-thinking neurocomputer. However, I'm not allowed to think over certain, like, you know, it's like certain things that you're not allowed to question. So it's like an artificial intelligence, but with like limits or parameters set. So what if it's something like that, where like Vegapunk put a chip in the Seraphim's head or something? So it's like they have to obey the world government. In fact, there was even a scene in the chapter where the Seraphim were fighting, and then all the people were turned to stone by Boa's ability. So Kobe was like, you know, you need to stop, Seraphim, stop. That's an order. And they did stop. They didn't do anything else after that. Okay, so they're issuing, like, if any of them, like, if a Marine issues you an order, if a Marine officer issues you an order, the Seraphim have to obey. So they're like, they are cyborgs. They're biological, and they're also technically robots, yeah, with robotic enhancements. Okay. So there's that. That's a big thing there. What else? Okay, let's talk about Punk Hazard a little bit here. Okay. So most of what we know about Punk Hazard was during the arc when Caesar was working there. Now remember, Caesar Clown set up operations there within the last 2 years. It was after Akainu and Aokiji's fight that he set up everything, and then that's where all the, you know, Lost showed up, and Monet was there, and the SAD production, and shipping it off to Kaido and everything like that. Yes, Caesar Clown was working on the gigantification program because of Big Mom to make, you know, the gigantification serum, and that's where like Mocha and all the kids that were living on Punk Hazard and everything like that. Those kids were then taken to Vegapunk's laboratory by Smoker and Tashigi in hopes that if anybody could cure them, it would be Vegapunk. What if Vegapunk used the research, you know, okay, so he took like a blood sample from Mocha or somebody from Punk Hazard, learning about what Caesar Clown did, and he used that technology into the Seraphim as well. And then even before that, this was years before that, remember when Nami and Chopper and everybody were running around Punk Hazard and they found that giant freezer? A giant freezer that was filled with, oh, what was it filled with? Oh yeah, giants? Now, I like to think this was long before Caesar Clown was just there by himself working with stuff, okay? Punk Hazard was originally Vegapunk's main lab before Caesar, you know, messed up and like the freaking nuke went off or something, you know what I mean? So, yeah, that was well before that. And then the numbers were mentioned to be failed ancient giant clones that were basically discarded from Punk Hazard, and then Kaido bought them off the black market, and then they were working for his crew, all right? So this was decades ago, before Caesar was in the picture, right? So, yeah, that's another extinct species, like the ancient giant species, the dragon species, the Lunarians. If you look back hard enough, the world government has been experimenting with reviving extinct species to be weaponized through their own devices. They've been doing this for a long time, all right? So I want to find out what's up with Vegapunk, dude. Vegapunk might have ties to the Revolutionary Army. He might turn out to be a good guy, and he might just be able to flip the switch and just be like, all the Seraphim are going to fight against the world government. I mean, honestly speaking, It's messed up what he did with all the DNA splicing and all that shit, but at the end of the day, if he has complete control over them, it could be like, all right, now I have my warlord army, and he flips the switch, and then they start working along the Seraphim join the side of the revolutionary army, and then they start fighting back against the world government, okay? Because, you know, that's, like, Vegapunk, I think, is his ultimate goal, at least I hope it is. We turn out we meet Vegapunk, and he's just straight up evil. He's just a straight up, it's like Aramaki all over again, where I was thinking, man, I'm thinking Admiral Greenbowl, he might be a nice guy, and then we find out what he's all about. So now we have Vegapunk. I'm like, I'm thinking Vegapunk's a cool dude, right? And then it's like, I don't know. I think there's enough hints that have been dropped, though, that Vegapunk is going to be a good guy. So we'll see about that. Okay. What else? Oh yeah, so some people have mentioned, okay, I brought this up as like just the naming scheme for the Seraphim. In Christian teachings, the Seraphims are the highest ranking angel, like right below God. Their whole thing is they kind of circle God infinitely, and then they shout like holy, holy, holy in threes as like they circle around God. It's probably that ties back to the Trinity. But their original origins is in Jewish teachings, where they are also part of the angel hierarchy, but they're not as high up as in Christian teachings, okay? And I wish I could talk to you more about this, and I'm reading up about it right now, and there's ties to other religions and stuff, but it's like that's one part of history that I'm not like super well versed in, like Judeo-Christian like history and all that kind of stuff, but I'm learning about it, so I'm researching and stuff, but I'm not up to that point yet. I'm literally starting, like a while back I decided I'm going to start from the beginning of human history that we know, so like, you know, Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Babylonians, and like working my way up the Indus River Valley situation, the Indus River Valley situation, the Indus River Valley civilization, working my way up. Okay, so I'm not quite up to that particular area yet with, like, you know, Abraham and like Jewish teachings and stuff, but I'm getting there. Okay, I'm on China right now. I'm researching ancient China, and then maybe I'll move back to like the Middle East and learn more about that. Okay, I don't know, but yeah, so that's the situation with the Seraphim, though, just in general. They're also referred to as the fiery ones or the burning ones, which once again references the Lunarians. Not sure if Oda's going along with this, just like they're called the burning ones, so that makes sense why they be called Seraphim. By the way, Seraphim is the plural. Seraph is just the singular. Okay, so a singular Seraphim is just a seraph. Okay, and they have in teachings they have 6 wings. One set of wings like covers their eyes. Another set of wings they use to fly, and another set of wings covers their legs, I think. Obviously, the Lunarians only. Well, okay. Here's the thing. The Seraphim that we know right now in, like, their initial stage, I guess, they only have 2 wings. But what if they grow older and then they have 6 wings? So to denote how much stronger they are, okay? So I want you to picture, like, Boa Hancock as a Lunarian with 6 flaming wings on her back, launching death lasers from above. That shit's terrifying, you know what I mean? That's absolutely terrifying. All right, so yeah, more into that there. They have really strong weapons. The clone of Mihawk had a giant sword. It wasn't like Yoru, but it was a sword strong enough to slice a mountain in half, so pretty damn good, I'd have to say. Oh my goodness. There's so many angles you could go with this, and like potential, like they could literally make an entire damn army. It might be the damn Clone Wars by the end of this. It seriously might. Like the final arc is like, okay, the Straw Hats are going to find the One Piece. Although no, the Marines are there. They can't fight against all of the Marines. And then that's when Vegapunk reveals he's a good guy the whole time, and he has a whole damn army of like clones of the warlords, clones of the Yonko, clones of the Marines, and it's like, attack each other, go! And it's like Akainu's fighting Akainu, and it's like Kaido shows up, except he's clone Kaido, and it's like, oh shit! It's gonna be insanity. All right. Well, anyway, yeah. Those are my initial thoughts on the Seraphim. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think we're gonna be moving on from lemming facts. I just really wanted to talk about mostly how all the misconceptions around lemmings swim around. So, yeah. Next up is going to be the letter M. We are halfway through this. Halfway through the alphabet, ladies and gentlemen. Animal facts. And you know what? In honor of this momentous occasion, I will let you guys decide which animal I will pick for the letter M of animal facts. Okay, so go ahead and comment down below which animal you think I should talk about next. And, yeah, we'll see which gets the most upvotes, I suppose, and which one I go with. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Tekking, signing out. Oh, and remember to tune in next time for some Wang Xi!